There are places where nothing looks out of place, and yet something doesn't sit right. Not in a way you can name, not something you can point to, just a feeling. Like the land remembers something that you don't. Where the water moves the way it always has, tides in, tides out, but beneath that rhythm something has already happened. Something that changed the shape of that place in a way you can't see anymore. You stand there, you feel the wind, you hear the water, and everything tells you it's calm. But calm doesn't mean untouched, because some places don't hold time the way we think they do. They don't let everything go. They keep fragments of moments, of fear, of the exact second something shifted that didn't shift back. And over time, we try to make sense of that. We tell stories, we fill in gaps, we give shape to things that we can't explain. But sometimes the truth isn't hidden. It's just sitting there, quieter than the stories we've built around it. And maybe that's what unsettles us the most. Not what we imagine happened, but what actually did. Welcome to If These Trees Could Talk.
This episode takes place on the lands of the Dark and Young people, and today, as we record, we are on the lands of the Wonnarua people. We wish to pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge the ancestors of both nations where connection to land, water and community continues today. We live on country that has been known, walked and cared for tens of thousands of years. Long before any of the stories we're about to share took place, this land, these waterways and this coastline held meaning, knowledge and connection. And that matters, because when we talk about places like this and what's happened here and what's been seen here, we're stepping into somewhere that already holds deep history, not just the stories we know, but the ones that have been carried for generations.
Those logs went straight through her. I just got goosebumps all over me as I said that. I just don't understand why these girls were forgotten. Honestly, it's just horrific. The jury returned a verdict of not guilty. Stop. I am about to head back to Patonga, which you know, and I think our listeners know, is my favourite holiday of the year. And I know we've done a lot around the Central Coast recently, but because I was heading that way, I started looking at if there was any more stories in the area, and I haven't come up with one from Patonga, but today we're going to take a little adventure to Norah Head.
Oh, I've been there.
Did you love it?
I loved it. It's beautiful.
It is absolutely beautiful. We stayed there a couple of years ago. Oh, it'd be quite a few years ago. There's photos of Charlie in that little rock pool. Mm. It's a beautiful spot. The Lighthouse is gorgeous. Well, we're going to learn a bit more about it today. But before we head into this story, I want to properly place our listeners there. So if they haven't visited, they get a bit of a scope for what it looks like too. Because Norah Head isn't just a setting. The way this place is laid out actually explains a lot about what is about to unfold in today's stories. Norah Head sits on the Central Coast of New South Wales, and it's a headland that just kind of pops out straight into the ocean. Not gently, it pushes out further than most of the land on the coastline around it. Have a look at it on Google Maps. It's very interesting when you have a look at it. This will help you as we go through this. So you can see that little headland that kind of pops out and then all of the lakes down behind it. mentioning those lakes. So just inland from where Norah Head is, you've got this chain of coastal lakes. There's Lake Marmora, Budgewoi Lake and Tuggerah Lake, and Norah Head sits pretty much in the middle of that lake system. So you've got this really thin strip of land with open ocean to one side, but it's still enclosed by water on the west of the coastline there.
I've spent so much time in these places but never really studied what this looks like from the air.
I know, it's incredible, isn't it? Don't put the maps away because there's going to be more. So out on this headland and in the areas around it, so when you're in the Lake Marmora National Park part, the cliff lines and stuff are pretty extraordinary. Have you been to that blowhole area and
Where at?
a little bit north of Norah Head? No?
The blowhole. No, I don't think so.
When you're out on the headlands and the cliffs, the wind and the swell and the movement, it's quite fast and chaotic. There's a lot of waves crashing and stuff. But then just inland, you've got this really quiet, still, glassy lake area. It's a real contrast between the two. But then if you zoom out a little bit further, you'll see that that little strip of the Central Coast where those three lakes are is bordered by Marmora State Conservation Area to the north and Warrabulong National Park to the south. So this whole stretch feels kind of held by nature. There's lots of little communities in that area, but when you look at it on a map, it's not overdeveloped. So at the north, there's another huge lake, Lake Macquarie, and that is fed through Swansea Heads. And then down south, the three lakes at the bottom are fed through the entrance. And Norah Head sits pretty much smack bang in between those two inlets. So what you end up with is this narrow corridor of coastline, water moving in from the north, water moving in from the south, and bushland pressing in close in both directions. Then to the west, the Great Dividing Range sits really close to the coastline here. So you've basically got that thin strip of land, the houses and communities, the lakes, the freeway, and then almost immediately you're back into dense bush. You'll see it bordered by places like the Wadigans and Onley State Forest, Gillaby State Conservation Area and Arimba State Forest. And then all of those push back onto Yango National Park and Wallamai National Park. When you go into the Central Coast, it feels like quite a populated area, but you don't realise how much wilderness is actually surrounding it.
You're right. It doesn't take much of a drive to end up in forest.
No.
I was just there on Friday.
Yeah, it's a really incredible place. So everything kind of funnels through this one pocket of built-up land, which Norah Head is basically smack bang in the middle of. And when we start layering in the things that have happened here, it kind of stops it feeling like separate events. Just as I was looking at it on the map and I'm like, wow, all of these things could be connected, but you'll understand more about that in a minute. So on that headland sits Norah Head Lighthouse, and that is there for a reason. Anything that moves along that coastline, boats, weather, gets funneled past this exact stretch. And if something is misjudged, this is where it's going to show up first.
Do we still need lighthouses with modern GPS systems?
I don't know. They still have them lit, so I wonder.
Let us know.
Yeah, I really need a maritime.
You have told me this is not your favourite part of history, maritime boats, ships.
Yeah, I struggle with it, although I was very interested in studying some of the background here, and you'll understand why. It would be great to have someone who understood maritime history, because I did a bit of a deep dive into the shipwrecks in this area, because they're going to play a bit of a part in today's story. But shipwrecks aren't just accidents, they're moments. Moments where people realised, sometimes very quickly, that they aren't going to make it back to shore. And along coastlines like this, those moments don't always stay neatly in the past. Because when you stand at the lookouts or along the headlands here and just watch the waves hit the cliffs, it doesn't take long to realise how quickly things could go terribly wrong. One set rolls in and it looks manageable, and the next hits those cliffs harder than you expect. And suddenly you understand how easy some of these people might have found themselves in this situation. But before we get into any one story, you actually need to understand just how much has happened along this coastline, because it's not just one or two incidents. Across Australia, there are estimated to be somewhere between 8,000 and 11,000 shipwrecks, and only a fraction of those have been properly recorded. And right here, along this stretch of the Central Coast, there have been around 200 recorded wrecks in what feels like a relatively small, quiet part of our coastline. And when you narrow it down even further to the waters around Norah Head, it becomes even clearer why that lighthouse had to be built. In the years leading up to its construction, there were multiple wrecks in quick succession, enough that it was considered a serious danger to shipping routes. At one point, there were around 10 wrecks in less than a decade in this immediate area. So it wasn't rare. This was happening often enough that people were calling for change, and by 1903, after years of wrecks, the Norah Head Lighthouse was finally built and lit. And this is where the history of this place really starts to lock into our story today. Before the beaches in this cove had modern names, it was called Cabbage Tree Harbour. There are a succession of small beaches dotted around this cove. Jenny Dixon Beach sits not far from the headland, tucked slightly away, more protected than the open ocean. From the water near the headland, it is this beach that would be visible, and it would have looked like somewhere you could have got out of trouble. I've found varying details, but somewhere between 1869 and 1871, a schooner called the Janet Dixon was travelling this coastline, moving between Sydney and Newcastle, but it never made it through. The vessel was wrecked just off this stretch, so close to that sheltered harbour, but not close enough. And that moment stayed attached to this place. Over time, this little stretch of sand became known as Jenny Dixon Beach, a slight shift in the name of Janet Dixon, but one that carried the story with it, because every time that name is said, it traces back to that shipwreck. The bell, and this is just a little bit of cool information, the bell from that ship was salvaged many years after, and it now sits at Tukley Primary School. I thought that was cool. But that's where this story shifts, Megan.
That's the only cool information we have to share, the only good stuff.
Yeah. The story around this shifts. There's a little bit of varying information. The details change and versions evolve, and somewhere along the way, the wreck of the Janet Dixon stops being about a ship. It becomes something else entirely. It's where the story shifts from history into something people say they've actually seen. In 1973, 4 boys who were around 12 years old camped overnight at Jenny Dixon Beach.
That's too little to be camping on your own.
I did think that, but different time. It's the 70s. Would I let Charlie go and camp on a beach by himself? No, I would not. But it was the middle of the night, and they were there sitting around the fire with their sleeping bags, and I'm assuming they're cooking themselves dinner and stuff. And they said a woman appeared just beyond the light of their fire. She was still and silent, but her clothing didn't match the era, and her arms were outstretched towards them, reaching towards them. They thought it was a joke, So they threw things at her, like burning logs from their fire.
12-year-old boys, am I right?
Yep. However, those logs went straight through her.
Well, that took an unexpected turn.
How long have you been recording with me? And the boys, I think it's safe to say, shit themselves. And they ran up off the beach heading for the stairs. Now, the stairs are treacherous enough. Have you been down the stairs to this beach?
Yeah.
Like they're a wild set of stairs, right? So they take off back towards the car park and up the stairs. And as they got towards the top, they looked back and they couldn't see her on the sand anymore. But as they kind of looked around, she was on the staircase, closer to them than she was before and still reaching out towards them. In the aftermath to this experience, all 4 of these boys gave the exact same account. So 12-year-old boys, right? The fact that all of their stories lined up, like either they sat on the beach and was like, we're going to make the coolest ghost story ever.
Which is possible.
Or they were telling the truth. Those 4 boys are not the only people to have seen this lady on Jenny Dixon Beach. I haven't been able to find a confirmed passenger list for the Janet Dixon, but I have found other shipwreck accounts along this coastline from that time that describes mothers being lost at sea with an infant on board. And this seems to be the story that is lent into. From some of the stuff that I could find, I think they refer to this ghost as Jenny Dixon, but she was not Jenny Dixon. Jenny Dixon comes from Janet Dixon. It's just a shortened version, and that's what they named the beach. And there's a Jenny Dixon Reserve.
Yeah,
yes.
I've been to a party there.
Oh, wow. At a haunted location, Megan.
Didn't know that at the time.
Who even are you? So that was definitely named after the shipwreck. But because so many people in this area have seen this woman, she has been named Jenny Dixon, and a lot of people think that the beach is actually named after the ghost and not the shipwreck. So we'll just dispel that. I have definitely been able to confirm that it is named that after the shipwreck. But because of the level of reports, and you can go onto any Central Coast Council website, everywhere you look for information of this area, it comes back to this ghost story. It is mentioned everywhere, and there are accounts all over the place of different people who have witnessed this woman. Every single one is the same, with the period clothing and the fact that her arms are outstretched. There have been so many paranormal investigators go to this space, and the belief is that this woman is searching for her child who was lost in the shipwreck. I did see a paranormal investigation where they believe that she was not on board the Janet Dixon, that she was on board another ship, and they may even have a name for her, but I cannot confirm that. That was only the paranormal investigator's explanation, so I'm not going to pass that name on. If people want to do a bit of research, you will find it. But yes, they do believe they know who this lady is.
So is she only seen at night time?
Early mornings as well.
Are we going to go camp out there like 12-year-old boys?
Well, this is what I was thinking. I'm like, I'm going to be in the Central Coast for 10 days. I think maybe we should go and camp out there.
I'm not going to be there.
Why? What about if we just send Tom and Charlie?
Yes, let's send the 12-year-old boys. You can have them. Take them.
She'd give them back pretty quick.
We love you boys.
We do. So I think with the story of the lady who lost her child and the fact that so many people have seen this woman, that those two things have connected. So obviously we don't know, but It makes a really excellent story. These sightings, though, like they just weren't around that 1970s period. Like they have gone on and people still see her now. Like if you go and talk to people who live in that area, they will have seen her or they will know somebody who has seen her. And I know that ghost stories are contagious, but there's something about this that sticks. Like in all of the stories that I've read about this one ghost, there's something that lines up in all of them. So I'm not here to prove or disprove anything. I'm just here to give you the information and you guys can make your own decisions. So what we've got from this story is a real shipwreck, a pattern of loss tied to this coastline, and a figure that people say they've seen on numerous occasions. In fact, I would go as far as saying over and over and over again. But that isn't the only ghost story tied to this area, because separate to everything happening down on that beach, there is another account that keeps coming up over and over and over again, and it is tied to Wilfred Barrett Drive. Do you know this stretch of road, Megan? Norah Head to the entrance.
Yes, but I didn't know that that's what it was called.
Okay. So we probably all have driven it several times.
Except our listener in
Nicaragua.
Shout out.
If that person is listening today, I am so excited every episode when you turn up. Whoever you are from Nicaragua, you really make my life. So for them, we'll explain. Wilfred Barrett Drive runs from Norah Head to the entrance. So that's Norah Head and then you go south towards the entrance. And it follows that same narrow strip of coastline that we talked about earlier. And the geography here matters. Down near the entrance, you've got the ocean on one side of the road and the lake on the other. It's quite close, very, very narrow. Water on both sides, nowhere to go. As you move north towards Norah Head, the land starts to widen out a little. You're driving right through the middle of Warrabulong National Park with bushland on both sides, and then on the outside of the bushland, you've got the Tasman Sea, Pacific Ocean. I never know the difference between the two. Do you?
I just think the Pacific Ocean's out there.
Yeah, it's also called the Tasman Sea, but I always thought that was further south. I get it confused all the time. So further out on the east side, you've got the ocean. And then on the west side, you've got the bushland and then you've got Tuggerah Lake. It's very dense in parts here, incredibly dark at night. So as you drive through there, it feels isolated and slightly removed from the busyness of the Central Coast. And then as you come into Norah Head, the road passes past Norah Head Cemetery, just off to the side, which is also quiet and unlit at night, and then you're back into town. And that's where this story sits, on that drive, in between those sections, and again, the details don't really change. Drivers, usually late at night, see a young woman standing on the side of the road, alone, waiting. So they pull over and she gets into the car, always the back seat. She doesn't say much, sometimes nothing at all, and just sits there, quiet. They keep driving, and then somewhere along that stretch, usually near the cemetery, she disappears. No door opening, no sound, just gone. And that's the part that stays consistent throughout all of these stories, no matter who tells it. Different people, different years, same experience. She gets in, she sits in the back, she speaks very little or not at all, and then she disappears. This story is Central Coast folklore. There is a version of this story's history. The story goes that basically for as long as the road has been in existence, a young woman is seen walking along Wilfred Barrett Drive trying to make her way home from Noraville. When she sees the headlights coming up behind her, she puts a hand out Some say hitchhiking, some saying trying to grab drivers' attention. The folklore around this story, which is very widely shared in this coastal community, is that some time ago a girl was walking along the road making her way home. A car pulls up with a group of 5 men in it. They found her quite attractive and said, "Hey, jump in, we'll give you a ride." They didn't take her home though. They took her down to the beach where they assaulted and killed her. Now, if that did happen, that's a very horrible story. But the folklore goes on to say that after she died, those 5 guys were never charged and got away with her murder. However, some spiritual justice occurred, and those 5 men lost their lives in pretty dramatic ways. I think the story is a couple of them had really brutal car accidents. One of them shot himself and the other one was suicide related, but I can't remember exactly what it was. But all 5 of them talked about her showing up in places in their lives. So it's a bit of a spiritual justice story, like they did this really bad thing and then this ghost comes back and haunts them and then they die in terrible ways, like she's reaping her justice on them. I did a deep dive into this to see if I could find any evidence that supported it, and I could find nothing. And you would think that if a young girl was murdered in that area, there would be some police report. I couldn't find anything in Trove. There was nothing that I could find that supported this. So it kind of felt like it didn't hold up. There are definitely no confirmed police records, no case files, and nothing that clearly matches that version of events along Wilfred Barrett Drive. There are some from other areas that could match, and I don't know whether those stories have been merged. But this story has been told and retold, I think, without any evidence. And there's hitchhiker stories everywhere, like not just Australia, all over the world, like hitchhiker ghost stories. And I think people might get a bit fascinated by it. But as I was doing all of this research, I came across a different story, one that is documented and one that did happen here. And it shifted the way that I looked at this local folklore. On the afternoon of August 29th, 1950, Grace and Kathleen Holmes left their home on Pierce Avenue in Toukley just after 1:30 p.m. Grace was 18 and her little sister Kathy was 11. They'd been home with their mum all day, had lunch together, nothing was out of place. When they left at 1:30, they told her they were heading towards the Lighthouse, which now Google Maps tells me would be just over an hour's walk from their home to the Lighthouse. And this was not unusual for these girls. They were close despite their age gap and spent tons of time exploring their new home together, always arriving home by about 5 to set the table for dinner. Their family hadn't been in Australia for long. They'd come out from England after the war chasing something safer, a better life. They had lived through the Blitz back in England, losing their home during the bombing, spending months living in bomb shelters. And they made it through. Australia was supposed to be where things got easier. And when they moved from Sydney to the coastal community with their father gaining employment in Newcastle, things looked really great for the Holmes family until that evening. It's unknown if the girls actually went to the Lighthouse that day. What we do know is they made their way along the edge of Tuggerah Lake, moving south along the foreshore on the western side of where Wilfred Barrett Drive now runs. At around 3:30 p.m, they were seen by 3 local boys, the Maisie brothers, near a small creek with a makeshift timber crossing. The boys were out shooting in what the locals called the jungle. the bushland on the eastern side of Tuggerah Lake. The boys ran into them near the creek and helped the girls cross the makeshift bridge. A brief interaction, nothing unusual, and the girls continued on. Not long after that, those same boys came across a man walking in the same direction as the girls had just gone. His name was William Birdle, and at the time he didn't stand out. By that evening, when the girls hadn't returned home, their mother knew something wasn't right. At first, it was family searching and then neighbours, and by nightfall it had grown into something bigger. Locals moving through the bushland along the lake's edge calling out, hoping that they had just lost their way. But as the hours passed, that hope started to shift. By the next day, the search party grew, police were involved, and near a place known as Duncan's Hut, they found signs of a struggle. Disturbed sand, blood, broken glass, and a button from torn clothing. And then further in, they found the girls, face down in a shallow swamp, partially hidden behind a log and covered in palm fronds and bracken. Both Grace and Kathy had been killed by severe head injuries. From the state of Kathy's clothes, the police made assumptions about what had occurred to the younger of the two sisters. They believe she had been killed first, before Grace. Police believe the attack had taken place where the sand was disturbed before their bodies were dragged into the scrub. There were marks on their bodies consistent with that, scratches, bruising, and signs of what the girls had been through. And then there were footprints, barefoot impressions in the sand. They were distinct. Whoever had made them had a deformity in their right foot, something that caused the toes to press into the sand in a way that stood out. Police quickly focused on William Birdle, and he wasn't hard to find. He was part of the search party looking for the girls. He had been placed in the area by the brothers' account, seen walking behind the girls. When he was questioned, he denied being near the scene, and then changed his version when confronted with the footprints that appeared to match his own. He was charged with their murders. The case went to trial, but there were no witnesses to the attack, no blood found on his clothing, and the footprint evidence, which was the strongest part of their case, was challenged in court.
Stop.
The jury returned a verdict of not guilty. William Birdle walked free. Grace and Kathy were buried locally. Their graves sat unmarked in Norahville Cemetery, not far from where people say the hitchhiker disappears from the car. And I just want to be really clear, I'm not saying that the spirit people claim to see out here is Grace, because we don't need to attach her to something unexplained to understand what happened here. There are hitchhiker ghost stories everywhere, all over the world, different roads, same style of story. But this one has been built around a version of events that doesn't have any evidence behind it, while at the exact same time, a real story has been here. And I just don't understand why these girls were forgotten. It just doesn't make sense to me when two young women, one who likely watched her little sister be murdered before she was killed herself, were lying in unmarked graves in this exact area for decades. The whole time I was researching this, I kept coming back to this one thing. Why do we need to build something fictional when the truth is already there? And honestly, it's just horrific. Because Grace and Kathy are real people. They had names, they had a family, and they had a life that they were just starting to build here. And for a long time, even in death, they were almost forgotten. But not completely. And this is the part for you, Megan, because there's not a real happy ending here, but there is something. There are great humans. More than 60 years after their death, a local man, Gary Bellinger, came across the graves in Norahville Cemetery. Unmarked, no names, just stones. And he started asking questions. Who were they? Why had no one marked this? He researched their deaths and their lives, and he shared their story, and people responded quietly but powerfully. Dozens of people donated what they could. A funeral company stepped in to help, and a stonemason offered to create and install the headstones at no cost. And in the end, Kathy and Grace were acknowledged in the most beautiful way. I just got goosebumps all over me as I said that. Kathy and Grace's brother Doug, who is the last surviving member of their family, said he was overwhelmed that after all this time people still cared about his sisters. And now they have something to say that they were here and that they mattered and were not forgotten.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. If These Trees Could Talk and What Would They Say are productions of Bellevue Studio. Our host is Shannon Walters, executive and audio production by Megan Anderson, with socials and marketing managed by Mia Oberdorf. We always appreciate hearing your thoughts, so if you would like to support the show, you can rate, review and subscribe. To stay up to date between episodes, you can also find us on Instagram, Facebook and TikTok. For more information on this episode or to connect with our guests, you'll find everything you need to know in the show notes at ifthesetreescouldtalk.com.au. We're grateful to have you with us, and we look forward to sharing what comes next. Thanks for being here.